Welcome to another episode of Wagon Wheel with I don't know if he's a new regular guest, but he can't find his own podcast, so he's moved days. Perhaps he's sick and tired of me asking him questions, and he prefer for the audience to ask him questions. But it's Bharat Sundaresan. Thanks for 2 weeks in a row. This is it's so weird to actually have you around for 2 weeks in a row.
Oh, come on. But it's good to keep it interesting, right? You don't know. Is it a Monday? Is it a. You, eventually I am going to turn into a wrestling character. So this is just me. Am I going to appear on Monday Night Raw or on SmackDown? I know this
See, I
doesn't
see you
make any
more as
sense to
the
you,
Heather
Jarrod.
Locklear of this podcast.
Oh.
Is that a reference? Does that mean anything to you, that reference?
I know she's an actress.
So Heather Locklear was the special guest star on her own show for like 4 years or something,
Oh,
and I
really?
always loved that you were never sure if she was actually going to turn up or not, even though it was quite clearly she was the major star of the show. Yeah, that one might be a little bit. I mean, I forget that I'm older than you as well. Not just the fact that we have different cultural references. But thanks for coming on again. We'll start with the questions. Patreon. If you're desperate to ask a question, Patreon's the best way. Go on, support us on Patreon. I can help, give money to Bharat to buy those hats. All the different things that the money goes towards. I think that's the first thing that it goes to costume. Uh, uh, but if you do want to ask questions there, but if you're in the YouTube chat and you want to ask them, of course, the other way is to go on to the super chats. But any questions go through. If they take out, I will have a look at them. But to start the show, Josh says, we talked about a World Test Championship draft last week. Any chance of you and the 99.94 crew actually doing one as a fun special video? Well, I would say this. I think me and Bharat are the only people left of 99.94. Sadly, that has disappeared. But I think I think this is an interesting one going ahead. I'm just going to do this. This is completely off the top of your head, and we can go really, really deep with this. And I think we can get someone like
Hmm.
Bayram perhaps on as well. But if I gave you the number one pick, you would pick Ravi Jadeja as number one.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay. And now I'm going to say, if you had the number two pick, who would be the second player that you would pick in world cricket?
Ooh. I'll pick Manas Labuschagne.
Ooh. So I thought you would say Pat Cummins, right?
Mm.
And Pat Cummins is a really interesting one because I reckon a year ago that would have been solid, and now I'm not sure if the
Mm.
market hasn't, And then I don't know where the factor in Rabada or Anderson in those sorts of things either. There's
Yeah.
some really, but Labuschagne's a very very good one. Baba Azam is probably another really good one as well, right?
Very much
And we
so.
haven't
Yeah.
and we haven't mentioned Ben Stokes. So Josh, I think it's a good idea. We're going to start doing some stuff like that, but we're going to have to think about it a bit more than just coming
Yeah.
off the top of our heads. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of argument. I'm sure you'll agree with the exact teams that we draft. Uh,
Of course.
another one from Josh. He says, "What do the following
Oh,
teams do? The following teams have a chance?" I'll say that again.
no.
Does the following team have a chance at the World Cup? Conway, Young, Daryl Mitchell, Latham Phillips, Michael Bracewell, Nisham Santner, Henry Southey Bolt. I've included the Daryl Mitchell and the Michael Bracewell only because he has included those initials in. Is there another
Mm.
Mitchell? Isn't there only one Mitchell in New Zealand cricket now?
At the moment, yes. But it does sound like a surname that's coming into vogue. For the longest time, there were a lot of Mitchells, like first name Mitchells,
Yep.
playing cricket, especially for Australia. But
I
now
would love a Mitch Mitchell. Mitch
Mitch
Mitchell
Mitchell
would
would be
be
great.
a very cricket name, I think.
It
Maybe if I
would
ever do
be.
a children's book, that player will be Mitch Mitchell.
Mitch Mitchell's a great name. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, so let's have a look at this team as far as the World Cup goes. There's some interesting stuff here. Conway plays spin very well.
Yeah.
Mitchell plays spin very well. Latham at number 4 is quite handy. Phillips likes to smash spin around. Then if you get to the bowlers, Bracewell and Santner, have both had success in Asia of recent times. Santner's probably unlucky not to be playing for Chennai at the moment, but
Mm.
Tikshana's just better, although he's had a rough start to the season. And then you've got Henry Southey Bolt. There's a lot of all-round skill kind of in that team. You don't need Nisham or Bracewell to necessarily bowl their 10 overs, but you probably need some overs. Plus, Glenn Phillips will bowl 2 or 3 overs occasionally when you need it.
Mm.
And, I suppose you could throw the ball to Mitchell, although I don't think he'd bowl much in that side. It's it's there and thereabouts, that team, isn't it? It's not got an exceptional spinner is probably the main thing, but I think there's a lot of players who can play spin quite well in that lineup.
I can compare this with the last time there was a 50-over World Cup, men's World Cup in the subcontinent, which is 2011, and the team looks pretty much similar to this in terms of the makeup. It's just the last leg of Jacob Oram, of course, Brendan McCullum was there. Daniel Vittori played in that World Cup. I remember, of course, he did 2011. Saudi was definitely around. I think he took a big haul in Chennai against someone. Bolt was there. But just the makeup of the side looks similar, except I think Devon Conway, just the way he's batting in the IPL and just his growth. I mentioned Manas Labuschagne in the last answer. The reason was just the how rapidly they have grown as cricketers. Every time you see a Manas or a Devon Conway, they look like a better cricketer than they did even the previous day or the previous innings. And I think he's a big plus for them at the top of the order. But yeah, I mean, on paper it looks really good. They have a chance to go far in the tournament, like most New Zealand teams do. But can they win it? I mean, it also depends on what the other teams are doing. I mean, the World Cups, especially 50-over World Cups in this format, it goes on forever to start with, and also, it's all about what the other teams are doing, which plays a big role in. Even New Zealand making it to the 2019 final, everybody feels bad for them that they didn't win in the end. But for the longest time, they weren't like even in a good enough position to go through. Other results played a big role in them qualifying for the semifinals. So if I'm not wrong, and so I think that also plays a big role. But yeah, but it kind of reminds me of that 2011. Maybe it's not a bad idea to look up that squad whenever we get time. The 2011
I can tell you
and
one
compare.
player you've forgotten only because he got fined for sledging Faf du Plessis while he was the 12th man, and that's Carl Mills.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
Who is also weird story. I was thinking about this the other day. How weird my life and career has been. One of the things I did. So South Africa were about to fall apart in that game, and New Zealand was sledging them so much that Kyle Mills, and there was someone else. There was like a 13th man as well who was sledging as well. Plus, fielders on the field were having a go at Faf, and I think AB might have been out there as well at that point. And I then, about 3 days later, got Ian O'Brien to recreate the 12th man sledging, including Sam Collins wearing a lion suit that we called Hansi the Lion. It's I just like, when you just remember little things, that whole incident, that's why Kyle Mills, that's why I'll never forget him, because he was involved in that whole thing. I will say this, at number 6 is Michael Bracewell. Slightly different kind of athlete to Scott Styris, but we'll divert from there. Satchmo says, if you could only pick one from Gavaskar or Kapildev, who do you choose for your side? I feel like I personally would have to do a huge deep dive into their overall careers, but my first thought is it's Kapildev, just because even if he can't bat at number 7, he's definitely going to strengthen your batting at number 8. And he was a fantastic bowler in the toughest bowling conditions for his kind around. Gavaskar was absolutely fantastic as well, but it's just that if you've got a choice, you generally pick the all-rounder in that situation, unless the single skilled player is Bradman.
Or Gavaskar. I mean, if you are picking a team where the choices are Gavaskar or Kapildev, you're maybe talking about them at their peak. So you're talking late 70s through the 80s or early 80s, when both of their peaks kind of came together. I mean, Gavaskar, of course, is much older and started in 1971 as compared to Kapildev, who started later in the decade. But I can see Gavaskar being ahead of Kapildev in some condition. I mean, if you are going to play against the West Indies or England in 82, 83, and just what Gavaskar did for that Indian team, it's people always talk about the number of runs he scored, but there's so much more to the impact that Gavaskar had on Indian cricket during the 70s and 80s. I mean, it kind of got overridden by Tendulkar and then, of course, Kohli in recent years. But if the Gavaskar era was in the 90s, I think it would have been on par with Tendulkar. I mean, just the impact he's had. I mean, obviously he's before my time in that sense, I was 2 years old in '87 when he played his last game. But just speaking to people in India, and also in terms of uh, maybe I'm really doing a deep dive into a very simple question here, but uh, just India as a country was kind of figuring out its own identity in the '70s. It's not even 30 years old. It's 24 years old as a country when Gavaskar makes his debut, like post independence and post many years of not being independent. And then Gavaskar really gave them that massive identity. Like, being one of the first Indian cricketers to be part of a World 11. I think Farooq Engineer and him were part of that in the early '70s, and so many other things. So just for that, I might actually pick Gavaskar. And also, he's a better storyteller than Kapil Dev from what I've seen.
But I so this is my thought is that part of the difference in the two of them is the background that they have and the way that they speak, right? And I do think that Gavaskar, that's part of his legend. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean that in in the same way that Shane Warne has a different kind of legacy than Anil Kumble has.
Yeah.
And it's not just record, right? It's
No,
about
no.
personality and the way they play and everything else. But Kapil Dev took 200 wickets in India, a bowling seam, at an average of 26, right? That is over a long period of time, while averaging, I don't know what he averaged with a bat in India, but it was like 35 or 40 or something ridiculous around that. They have managed to replace Gavaskar one way or another. Maybe not with another great opening batter, but certainly with other incredible batters. They've never had a seam bowling all-rounder like Kapil Dev since, and they didn't have one beforehand. It's hard. It is hard, but I think I lean towards the all-rounder. I think Gavaskar was a better cricketer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if I only had to pick one for my team, I just think that Kapil Dev gives you more variety in what you can do, and you're not losing anything with him. I'm pretty happy with that. I think it does say choose for your side. Satchmo may have meant ODI cricket. We may have overthought this a lot.
That's true. Yeah. Or T20 cricket. Who knows?
I did actually look up Gavaskar. Someone got really upset with me recently when I said that he was a better than average ODI player. And when you look up his record, he really was. Everyone only goes on the 30 not out of 120 balls or whatever, which, don't get me wrong, was a monumentally stupid thing to have happen.
Yeah.
But I do think the 30 not out of 120 balls is a little bit like Michael Clark's T20 international record, where you, at a certain point, you kind of have to go, was he taking it seriously? I still think Clark shouldn't be having a go at Australian cricketers for not being attacking enough in T20 cricket, but that's a separate argument. Manon says, Archer still shows glimpses of his old threatening self, but doesn't seem to be as consistent anymore. Can we expect him to be as good as before or even close? I think he's looked fine. He's still working his way back in. We saw Bhuvi Kumar struggle in an IPL season when he was coming back from injury. Deepak Chahar has, I think he went for runs again today, but I thought he bowled really well in the first 3 overs, but got hammered in that last over. He looks like, to me, a bowler who's trying to work his way back. In fact, I'm not even sure he was fully fit when he played today. And his figures don't look that good. But if you look at his overall career figures, we know he's very good. You remember when bowlers aren't 100%, and we know the whole thing, we won't relitigate the Will McPherson, Jofra Archer moment. But clearly, Jofra is not fully fit at the moment. And I think that's a big issue with bowlers.
And you spoke of Bhuvneshwar Kumar and Deepak Chahar, who played overall a lot more cricket than Jofra Archer has in his career. I mean, you break down Jofra Archer, the bowler, how much cricket has he actually played? Not much, if you think about it, right? Like this.
Well, you say that he did bowl 1,000 overs in New Zealand once, but continue.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think he made up for not playing enough cricket in that one series. You're right. But he's coming back from injury. He's come back from injury a few times, but he's still a pretty inexperienced cricketer in that sense. I mean, when you compare him with a Bhuvneshwar Kumar or even a Deepak Chahar, who's taking all those wickets back when I was still covering Ranji Trophy cricket in 2009-10. So I think that plays a big role in it. And you're right. I've seen a couple of Jofra Archer spells after his comeback from injury in the last week or so, and he's looked quick. Yes, the radar is he struggled with the radar a little bit, but that is T20 cricket as well, right? Like when you're trying to feel yourself back into rhythm while trying to bowl defensively or aggressively, depending on what the team wants and where the team is placed in the IPL standings and where the match situation is. And there are so many other factors that go into it. But you're doing that while trying to get yourself going, getting into rhythm. And I'm not saying he's thinking Ashes at the moment, but I'm sure somewhere in his thought process, he's thinking Ashes as well, right? Like he's running into bowl with a white ball in his hand, wearing like the shiny blue and gold of Mumbai Indians. But maybe when he walks back to final leg, he's like, okay, my body felt a certain way. Will it be good enough to bowl 30 overs? Or like, if he plays, obviously England will make him bowl 50 overs again. If test matches during this Ashes are going to last that long. Like I'm sure those thoughts are going through his head, and it'll take him a while. And like Ravi Shastri keeps saying on commentary, just let him play some more cricket. Like and that's the most important thing. Like with him, I think game time will be important, and we'll see maybe in the next. Did he play last night? Oh yeah, he did. He went for a lot of runs. That's right. Yeah, I just saw the scorecard when I woke up this morning. So
I think if you're looking for signs that he has a problem, I don't think the accuracy is part of it, because I think I have seen him bowl at times when he struggles with accuracy. It's not very often, but sometimes when he doesn't find a good rhythm, he can struggle a little bit with accuracy. If you're really looking for signs he's not any good anymore, it's the zip off the pitch, the bounce he gets off the pitch, and just his overall pace. And I don't think those are a massive concern for him at the moment. If he came back and he was bowling at 85 miles an hour, or he wasn't getting that weird steepling bounce that he gets from his action, that would be a far bigger problem for me from that point of view. He's look, all fast bowlers eventually degrade when it comes to pace, right? So Shoaib Akhtar was on steroids at one stage, wasn't he? Brett Lee, is Brett Lee one of the few guys that didn't lose much pace all the way through his career?
I mean, Mitch Johnson went off and then came back and was really quick. I mean, Sean Tate never lost pace. I mean, he never found his radar, but
I would argue that Sean Tate was probably quicker when he was before we ever saw him in front of the radar. So yeah, but you're right. Like, you know what I mean? There are a lot of there's more Sean Pollacks in the world, and than there are Brett Lees. Generally it's hard and it hurts your body, and you do that. And so what happens is bowlers, they keep enough pace, but they actually gain all the experience of playing at that level, and they pick up other tricks and everything else. And I think we've already seen with that spell that he bowled in Leeds that he has the ability to do that, Jofra. So, I wouldn't worry about him too much at the moment. If he's still spraying him down leg side in 2 years and he's lost the yard, then that's different.
With pace, I also compare it with driving, drinking, and bowling fast. For me, sort of are the same in terms of when you start drinking or you start driving, you're going full throttle, right? I mean, that's what I did. Like when you learn to drive as a teenager, you just want to drive.
Are you drinking
fast.
and driving in this analogy, or just
one or the
other?
Back then it was, back when I learned to drive in Bombay, drinking and driving wasn't frowned upon as it should have been, and it is now. So is all I'll say. So and with drinking as well, right? You just go full throttle. You're like downing bottles of beer and downing bottles of every other spirit that you can get your hands on. I'm not generalizing. That's what I did. But then you reach a point in life where you can do that if you really want to, but you also kind of find your cruise mode, whether it's with driving or with drinking. And similarly, I mean, I couldn't bowl at 150 kph, unfortunately, but you've seen it with so many fast bowlers. Like they start off bowling that pace, and those who are able to consistently bowl quick throughout their career, maybe not average 150 all the time, have that ability to really pick it up a notch when they want to, but also then kind of, depending on what the team needs and where the game is, kind of manage their pace and their workload and their body within themselves, not in terms of being managed by someone else. So I think that plays a big role in it as well. So there you go. Drinking, driving, and bowling fast, they're all the same.
Put that on social media. Okay. Swami Nathan says, if an LBW is overturned, shouldn't it be called a dead ball? I think he means, shouldn't it not be called a dead ball?
Yeah.
After that point. Alternatively, shouldn't umpires delay their calls of LBW, of leg before wicket, leg by runs, etc., like referees in soccer, waiting for the offside calls until the play is complete? So it's good that we have you as an umpire here. So this is only, I've heard people talk about these laws before, but this would actually be playing conditions, because it only comes about from I was going to say T20, but from DRS games. Essentially, what we have at the moment is the reason that it doesn't work like this in the laws is because once you are out LBW, that means automatically the ball is dead, and that's how cricket has to work outside of a DRS universe. What this question is talking about, and I've heard this asked before, is in a situation where it's the last ball of the game and you need 4 runs to win, and Jofra Archer has come in and bowled a Yorker. It's slanting down the leg side, but the umpire gives it out, flicks the pad, goes for 4. That 4 does not count because the LBW was given first. And what people are now saying is that seems like, that seems like the wrong answer to the question of shouldn't we let the play run out first before we act, or play out, I should say.
Yeah.
Run out means something different in cricket, Barrett. I'll explain that to you later. But shouldn't we let the play go ahead first and then make a decision on the LBW? Although it would be really weird if in some situations an umpire is waiting 40 seconds to make a decision on the LBW. Like how many times would they second and third guess themselves by that? But that's a separate argument. What do you think of this?
It's tricky, right? But I'm going to stick my neck out and say what around 7 or 8% of all competitive cricket matches played around the world have DRS. So the laws of the game still don't mention DRS, right? The laws of cricket still deal with cricket as being a sport without technology, especially from an umpiring perspective, having a role. And the laws say that the moment a dismissal happens, there are many ways that the ball can be dead. But the most obvious and glaring one is like if someone's given out, that's it. The ball is dead at that moment. But what happens with DRS is, in a way, you're reviewing the decision, right? So the umpire has made a decision at that point and said, not out. But then it's the chronology of what happens thereafter, right? Like, so the ball has hit the pad before it's gone to the boundary, to use your analogy of the last ball. But we are debating not what happened after that, but the decision itself, right? And I think that's it. It makes it complicated. I don't know whether the laws of the game going forward at some point the MCC will have to kind of include an addendum or something.
Well, I don't think the MCC will get involved in this. I think this will be a playing condition. I could be wrong. It will be a playing. I could be wrong. Yeah, but I think it'll be a playing condition.
Of course, and as we all know, playing condition supersedes the laws of the game. So, take that MCC in a way. So, which is true with any sport.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I want to almost run this in a simulator a few times to see if there's unexpected consequences from this. But we don't want, I mean, it wouldn't work in cricket if we had a live ball all the time like baseball has, for instance.
Yeah, oh no.
And so your dead ball exists for a reason and makes sense.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, if you've ever played indoor cricket, and you'll know that people are stealing runs in between balls and all sorts of things, because that is a live ball game. So yeah, I want to run it almost through a simulator, or maybe see it played out, this particular regulation. But I do understand the general principle of that and why it is the case. And it feels like common sense, but I feel like I'm almost missing something obvious that would mean that it shouldn't work. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I think I've given a better answer. So yes,
you definitely gave an answer.
Oh, thanks. Better
it was an answer.
I even pulled up the laws of the game,
which have nothing to do with it here because there's playing conditions. You're literally reading the wrong thing. Where's the ICC playing conditions, which I have tattooed on my forearm?
Yeah, I don't need playing conditions. I'm a stickler to the laws.
Keep
your playing conditions for yourself.
Update them. I'm around to the back of my arm now. Ian says, tomorrow at New Road, Worcestershire will have Azhar Ali playing against the Sussex side with Steve Smith and Cheteshwar Pujara in the second division of a county championship. Can you think of any other sports where top international stars would be playing in run-of-the-mill games outside the top tier? So I've got a funny story about this. So there was a book called, oh God, I've got to remember that. Whatever you do, it has to work. That's the name of the book. It's by Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller. And they were two, like, they ran a baseball podcast, and they were like analytics guys, and they were given this team to run. And it was like the lowest level of California baseball there was, right? And they went in with all their analytics stuff. And it's a really clever book and really funny, and they're both really talented guys. When I got the job at St. Lucia, I contacted them and said, look, I'm doing a similar thing. I just wanted to know, I've read your book, but can you give me some tips on what to do and what not to do? And they were really, really helpful. And then they were like, oh, so what's the situation? Is this like a major league or whatever? I said, well, it's Caribbean Premier League. So it's like the third or fourth biggest league in the world. But I said, it's Karen Pollard and David Warner and blah, blah. And I've never worked before. And then I was telling them all the different things. And they were like, wait, what? The best players in the world are playing in this random league and remember, I hadn't even told these guys just before that, all those same players had played in Canada in the global T20,
That's
right?
true, right, yeah.
Right. Andre Russell played in the Hong Kong Blitz. Cricket does have, like, in a way that very few other sports do, it does have the very best players in the world playing in some of the most bizarre situations. I mean, it's golf. Sometimes you do see some of the major golf players at a random tournament in the middle of nowhere. Tennis, in fact, bizarre story, but my kids play at a tennis club, and that tennis club used to be one of the, it's just like a suburban tennis club. But when I looked up one day, they had like all the people who'd won their tournament. And like the first name I see is Jimmy Connors, right?
Oh, really?
And then it's like Ivan Lendl, Navratilova, Pam Shriver, John McEnroe, Pat Cash, Fred Stolle, John Newcomb. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a suburb. And so I do think these things have happened more maybe in the past. But you would say, it's probably fairly unlikely that you're going to be playing, basketball in Serbia and the Joker turns up to play some basketball or Messi is suddenly playing in your local league, right? That's probably less likely. It does seem to happen more in cricket.
Also because there are more leagues as compared to players in a sense, right? Like, I mean, it's such a small sport when you think of really top level talent in terms of money as well. I mean, I read that report recently about how the IPL players' pay compares to the pay in other major leagues, and that's a telling stat when it comes to a question like this. It still tells you that cricket's still getting used to, even though we think that it's this moneyed sport and players are making a lot of money. It still like pales in comparison to what the soccer players in around Europe or everywhere else and the American sports people earn compared to the broadcast rights and everything else. So I think cricket's still kind of getting in touch with that, and there aren't enough of these players, especially at that T20 level, going around. So I think that's changing as well. I mean, you're right. For the longest time, you would see Chris Gayle playing in a league in Zimbabwe when there weren't so many leagues around. I'm talking 10 years ago, especially a lot of these West Indian players, whichever. I think I wrote about this as well. So I remember being in a car with Bravo and Gale in Pune in 2018. This is when for a couple of weeks, I played music promoter. I don't know whether I've told you the story where so I met Omari Banks, who's a really good friend of mine. In 2017, interview him, we've become good friends. And, Bharat says, he was about to release his single. He's like, next year you should do it in India during the IPL. And I say things like that. And then I forgot about it. So next year comes around, February or so, he messages me and he says, this is my manager. So what are we doing? Like, how are you going to set it up? I'm like, so, okay, yeah, cool. Don't worry. So I randomly get in touch with the PR agency in Mumbai, where who I didn't know. I just Google PR agency and I just picked the best one. I call them. I say, this is what I'm doing. Like, I'm a journalist, but and somehow they were like, yeah, cool. We've never done something like this before. We'll do it. So we fly Omari Banks to India. And I organized two shows, one in Pune and one in Bombay. So the Pune one was the first one, and we did it in a way. So I should be a music promoter, right? I did it in a way where I think Chris Gayle was playing for Punjab and Bravo was still playing for Chennai. So Punjab and Chennai were playing a game in Pune. So I told Omari, you get in touch with them and ask them to come. I'll manage everything else. So eventually on the day of the show, it was my responsibility to go get Chris Gayle and Dwayne Bravo from their hotel. And the conversation, and drop them back. But the conversation that I heard between them was quite fascinating, Jarrod. It was all about, and I realized that day Bravo was the one with the worldly knowledge. I mean, universe boss might be Chris Gayle, but Bravo is the one who knows everything about everyone that runs leagues around the world, and everyone in Bollywood. I mean, he was talking about Salman Khan's brother or brother-in-law owning a team or owning a stake in a club in Canada. And this is just before the Canada League happened for the first time, because I remember it vividly. Bravo telling Gail who owns the teams and how much money they'll make by playing there, and then him talking about some league in the Emirates, them talking about T10, and I was just there driving and listening to them, and I was like, wow, they're not some like random people who just to show up. They get a call from someone and they say, okay, I'll come and play in your league. They know everything about everyone that's running the league and what they'll make out of it and what it could mean. And yeah, and there they were playing in Canada a few months later. And the shows, by the way, were a huge success. Omari Banks released this uh, new single, which is about his beautiful island of Anguilla. And then the Bombay show had, I think Darren Sammy was the big noteworthy, chief of guest or whatever you want to call him. But yeah, there you go. So I was music promoter for 2 weeks.
I mean, who would have thought that Ian's question would end there? But no, you're right. When it comes to West Indian guys, I remember when I got the job with St. Lucia, in fact, Karen Pollard like did huge amount of research on me, right? Like beforehand, like I remember going to a World Cup game and there was like a local journalist, it must have been 2019, and she repeated like a one of those cliche comments about West Indian people that you hear so much. And I was just like, this guy out here, and I went through all the business connections he had, and I just picked a bunch of players out on the field. I said, like, you have no idea how driven these guys are. It's a whole different world. But still really weird that they played in Canada and Hong Kong.
Yeah, but just on Ian's question, I am looking forward to seeing Steve Smith play under Pujara's captaincy. From what I hear, Pujara is still captain, isn't he? So it'll be. I think he is. I think he still is.
Okay.
It'll be a good partnership to observe. I think more than just the amount of runs they score, because they'll both be in their own. Their own shells.
They may not notice the other ones at the other end.
That's true. Yeah, that's a very good point. They might get to 100 runs partnership and suddenly shake hands, and then Steve Smith will be like, "Oh, I'm batting with you."
Yeah.
And it'll be similar from Cheteshwar Pujara. It'll be a very quiet partnership.
Bloody Bugger says, Jarrod, you have mentioned that Indian pitches today spin far more and more difficult than 10 to 15 years ago. But how did today's pitches compare to what the famous spin quartet bowled on? Bishop Beatty's pace may have been pedestrian today, but the pitches today spin more than back in his day. So, yeah, the pitches, conventionally, Indian pitches have always been very, very flat. So if you go through the records, I think Australia is the only place that for a long period of time, I think maybe the UAE might be the other one, but those are the three places in Test cricket where the most runs have come from. Some of that is also the batters, but the reason that they all have good batters is also because they come from places with very flat pitches. So those things do sort of feed into each other. So Bishop Beatty certainly would have been playing on pitches that would, it's not that they would never have spun, and they certainly, the old-fashioned subcontinental wickets, it's what, 500 plays 470, and then 150 plays 80, right? Like there was a lot of that sort of stuff happening as well. So the pitches did fall apart, but certainly throughout the first innings, there was a lot of runs to be made on those surfaces for a long time. If you, one day I'm going to go back and do a really deep dive into Anil Kumble's career, but I wonder if a bowler has ever bowled as often on pitches where the average was so high as it was in the games that he played. So it's a really interesting one to have a look at those records. So they're certainly a lot different than today. And most wickets are different than today, it should be said.
Oh, they are. And I think more than how much they turn, it's I think a question of how quickly they start turning and how quickly the pitches start to deteriorate. And I just while you're talking about, I was just answering that question, I just pulled up some numbers for Bishan Singh Bedi, and I think of the 14 5-wicket, not I think, it's in front of me, of the 14 5-wicket hauls that Bishan Bedi did take in Test cricket, only 3 of those, or only 4 of those, he got them within 25 overs or bowling 25 overs. And of which, funnily enough, he took 5 for 55 of 13.7 overs. So the 8 ball overs in Australia. at the Gabba. So this was in 1977. But so only on 3 occasions did he manage to take 5 wickets within 25 overs. Invariably, he was bowling 30, 40, 50, even 60 overs to get those 5 wickets. And I mean, even when you speak to them or hear the likes of Beatty and spinners from that generation, Indian spinners from that generation, talk about taking wickets, they always talk about earning your wickets or, kind of being hit for a couple of sixes, that old analogy, and then getting the batter out of the third ball. You need to kind of pay to get your wickets in that sense. They were doing that because the pitches made sure that they had to do that. And Test cricket was played at a different pace as well. So I think that plays a big role in it. So I think it's not to say that you need to automatically undermine what Jadeja and Ashwin and Akshar Patel do. It's just different skill set. I mean, you need to, and you always hear about it, right? Like bowling on a pitch like what we had in Indore, for example. It comes with its challenges. It's not like as a spinner you just rock up and you're going to take a lot of wickets. And which is why I thought the 5 wicket haul that Ashwin got in Ahmedabad was so important, not just for him and his career, but to kind of put things into perspective. That it's not that a Jadeja or an Ashwin does not have the skills to take wickets on a flat pitch or a pitch which doesn't offer them as much as some other pitches do. I remember Jadeja taking 6 or 7 in that test in Chennai in 2016. Where India beat England, a match that where England make 400 in the first innings and still lose on the final day. So it's just that the skill levels have changed, the game has changed. But I think in terms of what the pitches were doing, it's just that they start deteriorating on an average much quicker or much sooner than what was happening.
First over.
Like, first over at times, as we've seen, like a keeper's getting hit on the head.
Exactly. And they are bowling quicker. And so that actually puts a lot more pressure on the batters. Batters just can't use their feet the way that they used to. And DRS has completely changed it. I would say that we talked about this with Richard Hadley the other day and versus Glenn McGrath, which was another question we got asked. Yep. There's absolutely no doubt that there is a modern way of bowling that some of the older players had more varied ways of getting you out because they had to, right? Because of the kinds of things they did. Most modern spinners now generally just bowl at the stumps, right? Yeah. And they're not trying to toss it up and get it above your eye line or anything like that. They're not trying to get you stumped. They're literally just trying to get you bowled in LBW over and over again. And if not inside edge or outside edge sort of thing. So they're very different to, if you watch Bisham Beatty, even when he got an edge, he was so slow that they didn't always carry, right? The slip had to be so close as well. So it is fundamentally changed. All right, we're going to take a short break here. And then after the break, we will come back with a couple more Patreon questions, and then we'll have a look at the room.
A few years ago, I had a panic attack after ESPN Cricinfo made me their global writer. I'd earned that position, but I also felt like a fraud at the time because I didn't really understand how I wrote. I understand that there was a process and gears and different styles and things, but how it all came together felt a little bit random. And so I began to panic like a golfer with a natural swing, worried one day I'd just end up with the yips. And would my career be over? So I took my writing apart piece by piece until I understood it. And then I figured out I could teach others all the mistakes I had learned. So I started an online course where I tried to make it as cheap as possible so people like me would be able to afford it. It's called Fans with Laptops, and heaps of people from around the world have used it so far, from first-time writers all the way through to professionals trying to improve. I started with a simple plan to make each writer the best they could be. And from the feedback I've received over the years, it seems like the course does that. But after COVID, my career changed. I came to YouTube, started podcasts, wrote emails, and formed a new career on my own going forward. So I now had something else to offer, the multimedia side of things, social media and everything else. Not to mention that I was building everything up as an independent. And so I added all of that to my course. So if you have ever wanted to work in sports as a writer or podcaster or making videos or anything else, Fans with Laptops is the place to start. If you think you qualify as a fan and you have a laptop and you want to work in sport, click on the link.
Welcome back to Wagon Wheel with Jarrod Kimber and Bharat Sundaresan. That animation that Rahul made, that is supposed to be me in the animation, by the way.
I was wondering who that was. Yeah,
I do. I kind of look like the evil white character in an anime thing, and I'm all for that because I think that's probably my natural, my natural safe zone. Thomas says,
look, and also I generally have heard that celebrities like you hire models to play them in actual advertisements.
Don't
I can't believe
celebrities like you, when
you
you're
got an
on this
AI
call,
model.
you are the celebrity of this podcast. Thomas says, I've just finished expected goals about the rise of advanced metrics in football. Is matchups the closest cricket has come to a mainstream data-driven stat? Is there anything lurking below the surface used by teams at the moment? I mean, matchups, it depends on what you mean by matchups, because they're one of the most overrated sort of terms in cricket, because a real matchup means one bowler against one batter, and we usually don't have enough data to actually be able to work that out. But if you're talking about, Chennai is a masterclass in the way that, again, that Dhoni used his matchups today when Chennai got on top against Super Giants in that washed out game. That's the one that I think was the most obvious. That actually goes back probably a long way. And I think also, Krishna Tunga was doing that sort of stuff for the Cricket Australian team probably back into the early 2000s as well. So it probably has the longest history. I would say that maybe the more important one is things like nearest neighbor analysis. That is what CricViz and the England team use. And I think the Indian team started to get into that stuff as well. So you can tell if there's a kind of delivery that bothers someone, and it might be that kind of bowling where it's released from, or the way that they spin it, or whatever else, or it might be the exact line and length and everything else. I think those are the biggest ones that I've heard of at the moment, and I think that's probably a far more, matchups are handy, but I think that's probably taking it to the next level.
Oh, I think cricket has a long way to go before it kind of fulfills its potential as in terms of using data and what you get out of it. But it's also it's a unique sport, right? Like you spoke about dead balls, and it is a stop-start sport where often what you can gauge, or you can kind of calculate or put a number on how many or the types of balls a bowler bowls, or in terms of where he tries to attack a left-hander or a right-hander, or even a particular batter. But then there's the reaction bit of it, like you can't gauge, right? Like I mean, it happens with other sport as well, I'm sure. Players have bad days and good days, but there are also days where a bowler might have such clarity of thought, where even if he's been hit for a couple of boundaries, he still thinks he's going to hit the Yorker, whatever ball he generally bowls, or whatever he backs himself to, or he might change plans. I mean, often you hear about captains and bowling lineups having plans for a particular batter or for a particular over, and then on the go you change, right? I mean, you're running into bowl, for example, with this field is set in a certain way. You're thinking Yorker because for all the matchups and all the data I've said this particular Kyron Pollard or whoever is going to do this. But what if he suddenly steps out of his crease? Then what do? You have to adapt at that point. You can't still stick to bowling what you were trying to bowl. If it was a Yorker, he might pick, it'll end up as a full toss. So do you change your line? Do you, like, as a bowler, you have to constantly think on your feet. So I think that I don't think the human science has evolved to an extent where you can start recording that. Maybe it has. Maybe Jarrod Kimber sitting right now and recording or getting a number or stat going on what I'm thinking and my emotions and how I react to his tough questions. But I'm sure it's happening, but it has a long way. I've spent a lot of time with Prasanna Agoram, who worked for years with South Africa. He's a really, really good friend of mine. And his kind of data analysis is very different to what you get from CricViz. This is still traditional in some sense, where he's got so much content of, like, literally, it's amazing the video content these guys have, right? And it's not just of like a Virat Kohli or a Cheteshwar Pujara or a David Warner. I'm talking someone who's played. I remember him showing me clips of Ishan Kishan from 2017, right, when he had only played domestic cricket. But he had clips of just, okay, these are all of Ishan Kishan's sixes in the last 2 years. Yeah. From under 19 cricket. And I'm sure you've done that same thing, Jarrod, when you work with teams as well. So that's still more traditional form of data analysis, right? You get a lot of video content out there and then you break it down. I think Dean Hills does that a lot with the current Australian team. He's been doing that for years. And also then it depends on the team dynamics and who the coach is, how much the coach believes in stat-driven data. And I'm sure you've worked with so many different coaches, Jarrod. You would have found some resistance from some. I mean, Justin Langer. I mean,
No, they all loved everything I did and listened to everything at all times.
you they did, I'm sure. You just
Yeah.
walked into the room and
Look,
you
I
said,
think there's a couple of things to be said here. One is that in some ways it's very much like baseball. There's so much to analyze, and it's very easy to analyze in a way that football and basketball and rugby are a little bit harder at times, right? Because here's a moment and we record that moment, and this guy does this and this guy does this, right? But there's other baseball doesn't have a pitch, right? And so you bowl into Suresh Raina, everyone knows what the plan is going to be to Suresh Raina, and then that pitch doesn't bounce above waist high.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, and so that is always an element. The other thing I would say is that matchups aren't as simple. One of the things that Dhoni is very good at when it comes to matchups is that he plays the matchups a lot, but he's also very, very aware of what happens in the background. As in, I remember, I'm trying to think of let's say Raina comes in, and it's the 8th over, and you've got a genuine fast bowler in your team, but he's already bowled 2 overs, and you're going to need him at the death. A lot of teams will just bowl 2 overs at Raina and hope that they get him out with that short ball, right? That then changes your whole dynamic. And in some ways, I think that was a big misunderstanding of matchups to begin with. They don't solve all problems. And they also, they actually bring other things. And sometimes by sending a player up the order who no one expects, and then you have to use your fast bowler or your spinner out of time or whatever that may be, actually is part of the plan. And you want the other team to react to it. So it's very, very interesting. But we are getting very good at mapping cricket balls. And we're getting very good at understanding, Jimenez is incredible. If you don't follow him on, what's his HGL, whatever his Twitter handle is, I should know off the top of my head. But, we're getting very good at mapping what cricket balls do and understanding what they do a lot more that, things like some bowlers, don't drop the ball as much as other bowlers. You watch Patharana and his, UFO release. He got Nicholas Pooran out today with definitely a ball that any other bowler would have been a half volley, and it was just that little bit fuller because he doesn't get the same kind of dip that other people get because he sort of undercuts the ball. Yeah. Anyway, all those sorts of things are what we are learning, and so we know a lot more about why Akshar Patel is good. We know a lot more about how slower balls work. Right. So the actual path of the ball stuff might actually be the answer to your question, Thomas, because we can now, I saw someone I really respect recently say, Harshal Patel, he's just a bits and pieces player. I don't even understand how he gets wickets. And I was like, well, that's because he gets mad drop on his slow ball.
Yeah, really?
Right.
Oh.
And he also gets,
someone said that.
Yeah. But that's the thing, because he is a fast medium bowler, right? And he's not massively skillful. And it's the same with the Arshdeep video I did last week, right? Sometimes, and Scott Boland, you can put him there. Potts is another one. You look at some of these bowlers and you're like, well, I understand Kyle Jamieson and Morne Morkel, right? And I understand Malcolm Marshall. Why is Arshdeep so good? And then when you break it down step by step, we can now do that really, really easily with artificial intelligence and AI and that's the same thing, I believe. Anyway, that's my point. I think the path of the ball and what the ball actually does is something that we will learn very soon. And obviously the other thing is going to be, the bat sensors and everything else, which we're already starting to use just a little bit as well.
Yeah, but you're right. What neutralizes everything in cricket is the pitch, because that's one thing we will never know enough about, I guess, or not yet, how the pitch is going to react. Like, you're right. I mean, the example you used of the short ball to Suresh Raina, what if because any short ball which is at that level, he was very good at hitting away. So that's going to always happen. That's going to be all right.
You can ask
wait for
this
this
one
next
to yourself.
No, please. You're the question master.
Kushal says, and he's hosted some of the, co-hosted with me some of the episodes. So in a local match, and I'm going to say Chembor.
Chembor's right, yeah.
But
Ghatkopar.
Ghatkopar. So
Ghatkopar.
In a local match between Ghatkopar and Chembor, which team would you support?
Confession, I was born in Ghatkopar, so I've always taken a lot of pride from being from the Republic of Ghatkopar, to the extent the number of times I've mentioned that, like on radio in Australia at times, early on, people would say, mate, so you're from India, right? I'm like, no, I'm from the Republic of Ghatkopar. And they go, oh, right. Yeah. Right. That's near India. I'm like, yeah, technically, but yeah, I'm not from. So,
I used to say I was from the Democratic Republic of Victoria, so I get the bit.
you know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I was born in Ghatkopar. So Ghatkopar and Chembur are pretty much neighboring suburbs. So it's literally just one flyover that divides there's the Ghatkopar Chembur divide. The flyover, the Chembur flyover divides it. So I was born in Ghatkopar, spent my first 2 years in Ghatkopar. I went to school in Ghatkopar, but my house that I grew up in and my mother still owns, where I slept when I went to Bombay now, it's in that mm, undefined zone between Ghatkopar and Chembur. So even though my
Ooh.
postal ID was Chembur, I always like backed Ghatkopar and everything. And Ghatkopar actually has also can lay claim to have Chaminda Was having played for them at one point. Speaking of big players playing in small leagues,
Yeah.
there is this long after he had retired, he played for a team called Ghatkopar Jets. But yeah, so my loyalties have always kind of rested more with Ghatkopar.
I
because
love that
could
you
re-
lived in the demilitarized zone
Of course I did.
of,
Yes,
of,
I,
of these places. Okay, so Chaminda Vaas, who's better at cricket? Which region?
I think Ghatkopar would definitely be better at gully cricket. I played a lot of gully cricket in Ghatkopar, though Ghatkopar didn't have a proper cricket gymkhana. Chembur did. So the first gymkhana I played for was Chembur Gymkhana because my brother played for Chembur Gymkhana as well. And my first coach was Vinod Kambli's brother, Vidyadhar Kambli, who I think is older brother. So he had tried his hand at coaching. I don't know what happened to him after that, but so he was my first coach. And I don't think Chembur Gymkhana back in the day produced any international cricketers, but they did have something which no other club in Bombay or I don't know, maybe India had, which is a video recording of matches. I'm talking 91, 92,
Wow.
Jarrod. Like, so if you played like for the senior Chembur Gymkhana team, regardless of what age level you're playing at, you would have like, you could watch yourself play cricket. I mean, imagine that for a kid back in the early 90s. I mean, it's so commonplace now. So it was quite special. So I had, I had
all the older people listening to this, their mind has been blown, and all the young people are like, yeah,
So,
we live stream
exactly,
our
yeah.
games, mate. What are you
Exactly.
talking about?
Yeah. So we have commentary for our games. Yeah. But yeah, so I did play for Chembur. Never played for Ghatkopar, but my loyalties will always stay. You know how it is. You're born in a place, you kind of stick to Ghatkopar. So I will support the Ghatkopar Jets over Chembur, whatever their team is called.
Bharat's heart is in Ghatkopar, I think is what he's saying. Satchmo says, if peak Joel Garner played T20, would he just bowl Yorkers and would they be as effective as 1979 or Batty's now savvy enough to score off them? I recall David Bairstow scoring off him in Sunday League. Yeah, there's no way he'd be able to bowl Yorkers. He would evolve and develop and everything else. But I've written about this so many times and it's so frustrating when people like go, no, they should just bowl Yorkers. So essentially there's a bunch of things that changed.
Yeah.
The first thing is that Lance Klusener found a way to hit them for boundaries. And once people worked out how to hit them for boundaries, that lessened their impact. And a lot of that is about strength and how hard you're trying to hit them. The second thing is that Asian bats took over. In the old days, English bats were the most popular. Asian bats have a lower middle because the ball is often lower to the ground. And that meant that it was easier to play, say, the helicopter shot and some, and all those other shots. A helicopter shot is a shot aimed at destroying Yorkers. The other thing is, back in the old days, Muhammad Isam was telling me about this recently, that Richard Hadley said one of the things that bowling to Javed Miandab was so difficult is Javed Miandab would move in his crease all the time. Back, forward. You never knew if you were hitting the right length. That wasn't... It happened, but it wasn't common. And all batters didn't do it, and they certainly didn't do it the way you do now, where you have Andre Russell or Hardik Pandya standing almost behind the stumps, and then you have someone else 2 meters down the wicket. You didn't have that kind of thing. All of those things have happened. And the other thing is that the difference is if you watch cricket in the early 2000s, commentators would say, even up until 10 years ago, really, commentators would say a low full toss is as good as a Yorker.
Yeah.
We now know a low full toss is nowhere near as good as a Yorker. It was before all these other things. And the last thing that changed is the scoop, right? Having the scoops available. So I think if you look, this isn't a perfect like for like, but one of the last bowlers to fully embrace slow balls as a T20 death specialist is probably Jason Holder. A couple of years ago, he was just bowling pace on all the time, using his height, using the Yorkers and occasionally the short balls and being very clever. even eventually he had to go to slower balls because there's just nothing else you could do. At a certain point, you have to do them. So Joel Garner would have bowled slower balls, and he would have, tried wide Yorkers more often. He certainly would have used bounces far more than he ever had to in his day.
I mean, you speak of Jason Holder now. I will take you back 20 years and talk of another tall West Indian fast bowler who had to learn the slow ball towards the end of his career was Courtney Walsh. And I was doing some random research recently. And the guy who apparently convinced him to do that was Bob Cottam, who coached him at Gloucestershire, I guess, or in one of I think, yeah, it must have been Gloucestershire. Didn't Courtney Walsh bowl like some 20,000 overs for them? So he convinced him to start bowling the slow ball because after a point towards the late 90s and in the early 2000s when Courtney Walsh was finishing up, a lot of batters started using their feet to him. And then you remember the famous slow balls he bowled to, was it Graham Thorpe? The famous one where the ball just loops and Graham Thorpe has no idea what's happened. And a few, Chris Reed was another one, if I'm not mistaken, from memory serves that. Or maybe the Chris Reed one was from Chris Cairns.
I was going to say it was Chris Cairns. That's one of the famous ones. But there's also stories of that happening early on. There's some with Simon O'Donnell and Franklin Stevenson as well. There was so for those who don't know, I give a brief explanation of why that happens. Essentially, every other ball that comes out of a fast bowler's hand goes down, and a slow ball goes up. And so, if your first instinct is that it's a beamer coming at your head, and I know people who faced Bravo for like 15 years and still thought every time he bowled one, they thought it was going to be a beamer. But now batters are so much more used to them, they don't do the duck anymore. So they stay in their position just that couple of seconds. If it is a beamer, they'll back themselves to get out of the way. And that's why it's happened. So yeah, Courtney Walsh certainly, even Curtly didn't have a slow ball for a long time and then suddenly had a good one. So it was a thing that happened at that period.
Yeah, and so Joel Garner would have gone the same route. He would have developed, he was so skillful that he would have developed enough additional skills and would have still backed himself to nail that Yorker. I mean, yes, there are all these shots that are being played these days. Not everyone is good at playing those shots. I mean, some, like whether it's a Surya Kumar Yadav or AB de Villiers or Lance Klusener. Lance Klusener, I was just thought that came to mind, Jarrod. I'm sure you discussed about this particular cricketer in the last few weeks, but doesn't Shivam Dube, just some of the things he does remind you of Lance Klusener? I know people have compared him with Yuvraj Singh, but every time I see Shivam Dube hit certain areas, it kind of reminds me of Lance Klusener. I don't know, maybe a discussion for the future.
I think he's not the same kind of, like, Klusener wasn't a clean striker. I know that sounds ridiculous because there was a bit of, I don't know, Ijaz,
and such a high backlift as well.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think there's probably a more, muscular or masculine style to Klusener, whereas Shivam Dube is probably the long straight lines a little bit more. But I mean, Shivam Dube's, this is going to sound sacrilege, but I mean, purely aesthetically, when you look at the backlift and everything, is maybe more Garfield Sobers.
Oh,
right.
Yeah,
like if you actually look at it, that's
true.
Almost like a combination of those three guys.
It's got that, like,
What? And we just have to be really clear here because the comment section might burn down. We're not comparing them in talent to Shivam Dube, just how they actually look.
Cricket analyst Jarrod Kimber compares Shivam Dube to Gary Sobers. I can see the headline already.
Have I ever told you about the one that went viral early on? It might have been a little while into my career. It might have been the 2013 Ashes when I said as a joke on Polite Inquiries that the only way for England to win this test match is if Ben Stokes turns into Garfield Sobers. And the headline they put on it was, is Stokes the new Sobers? Right? And like, Twitter, no one watched the video, of course, and so that was good fun. One thing I'd say about Garner, which I do think is interesting, Satchmo, if he bowled today, is because he was so tall. These days in T20 cricket, that's probably more of a help at the start of the innings. And he was known as the legend at the end. I think he was a pretty good bowler at the start as well. But these days, I wonder if he'd be even more value at the top because he had lateral movement and he was tall and he was fast. And there's no way you could hit him off a length, right? Like, the kind of bowler he was, a little bit like, I mean, Joel Garner was what Morne Morkel hinted at being, right? Like, and Morne Morkel never quite got to that level. So, no, it's a very, very good question. Thank you very much for that one. And Niran says, as batters find it difficult to bat in different conditions, does the same apply for umpires? Well, Hey, we have an umpire. For example, subcontinental batters find it hard to bat in South Africa due to the high bounce. Would Nitin Menon or Kumar Dharmasena similarly underestimate the bounce in South Africa compared to someone like Paul Rifle? If so, does it make any difference with DRS? I mean, the ICC should know the answer to this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
without texting Simon Torfel at this hour and asking him, my assumption is they should know this. I would say it would play some part, but most of those elite umpires have probably umpired in so many places it wouldn't have a problem. But I think umpiring against even nationalities you're not used to, and the way
Yeah.
that different players play cricket is confusing for umpires. I've certainly seen that happen, in places before.
I think the pitch conditions wouldn't make too much of a difference, but like you said, they get used to it. Once you reach a Nitin Menon or a Kumar Dharmasena level, the elite panel, you've done enough games. That's why you are at the elite panel. And these days, there are so many wonderful exchange programs that happen, not just at first class level. I mean, we're used to seeing an Australian umpire come and do a couple of Ranji Trophy games. You'll see an umpire from somewhere else come and do a couple of Shield games. But even at a slightly lower level, at the grassroots levels of umpiring, you see a lot of exchange programs happening. So you get exposed to it. I mean, if you're identified by your state association or your national board as someone who you can be, or who they can invest in terms of umpiring, they will start sending you out a lot more. There are developmental programs. There's a proper system in place in most countries for umpiring. It's a lot like the grassroots for players. So they get used to that. And also, you'll see a lot of them, all of them, come and spend some time in the nets. Doesn't mean the pitches in the nets will do exactly what the pitches in the middle will do. Rarely that happens. I mean, the pitches in the practice wickets that Australia were given in Gaul last year, they were seaming around, and we all know how the pitches played.
Well, the best one was the whacker, when the whacker pitches started to crumble and fall apart and not be very good anymore. The whacker nets were still like the old whacker wicket, right? So in the nets, you'd be like doing this the whole time, and then in the middle, Irfan Pathan's the best bowler, right? Like it was so different. So those things do happen. But yeah, I think you're right. I think, with the way that modern cricket is, I think things have changed quite a bit with that. And also, you're talking about Kumar Dharmasena. He actually played cricket around the world, right? He bowled in Australia.
Yeah, no, and true. I think the things that they might struggle with, or they have to get used to, is the noise. I think that's, you speak to Richard Kettleborough as someone I speak to a lot whenever I bump into him, and he's wonderful to talk to because he breaks it down really nicely, umpiring itself and the challenges. Now, obviously, he's so experienced coming to the subcontinent all these years, but the first thing they'll tell you is when they do go, and so even with the exchange programs, if you go and do a Ranji Trophy match, at the max you'll get like 3,000 people watching if it's a really popular game or there's a big star playing. But you go into a test match or an IPL, the noise is deafening, right? And it is a challenge. So as an umpire at any level, it's not always that you hear the nick. I can tell you, even when you're doing a school game, it's quiet. There's just the parents who are just mumbling away and hopefully preparing like a nice sandwich for not just the players but the umpires as well, and not watching the cricket. Even then, there are times when you don't hear a nick. And now just superimpose that into an IPL game or an international test match in India where there's so much constant noise. It's not like England or even in Australia where the noise goes up and down. There's just especially when, say, a couple of wickets have fallen in the same order, or one wicket has fallen, when the noise is just that the decibel levels are so high in India when a wicket has fallen, it can be a challenge. I think those things they will struggle with early on, but even there you find ways. Like I have my own technique when it comes to LBWs. I've discussed it with a few umpires, and some think it's good, some are not sure. Is what I do is, because I watch so much nets anyway, even when I'm umpiring, I try to figure out a batter's footwork. And whatever level you play, most batters have repetitive foot movement, right? I mean, it's challenge if someone gets out first ball, but you kind of study. I try to study their footwork and get a fair idea of where their front foot is, back foot is at the point of delivery and all of that. So that kind of helps you at times when the batter is struck somewhere. You're like, okay, this is where his front foot moves ball after ball after ball to a fast bowler. So I kind of have an idea that if he gets hit there, the chances are that it's 90% out in my head. Then you kind of like take a decision at that point. So I think every umpire has a technique, whether it's at my low level or at the elite panel. And so those things you kind of start using a lot more when you are exposed to an alien condition like whether it's in terms of noise or different batters, or like you said, if you're umpiring against a nationality that you haven't umpired, or if it's a team that you've never had anything to do with, that can be a challenge as well. So that's why you see the best umpires are always the best communicators as well. I've always believed that the best umpires make great husbands, or male umpires. I'm sure it's similar. I should say the best partners. Why husbands? Because they're very good at communicating. You still communicate what you want to communicate without ever, making sure that it's never a confrontation.
And on that note, we'll have a quick break, and then after the break, we'll see if there's any questions in the chat. You're listening to Uncovered with Jarrod Kimber and Bharat Sundaresan.
Our next partner is Athletic Greens. If cricket has taught us anything, it's that green things are good for you. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens every day. I gave AG1 a try because a while back I was stuck in a studio reporting on New Zealand, England on overnight. When those games weren't on, I was up early watching India, Australia at around 4 a.m. In between afternoon naps, I had to watch the Women's World Cup. And when all that was finished, I was doing early mornings for Bangladesh, England. Ignoring the fact that there's too much cricket, that's a stupid schedule for a human being as well. And so Athletic Greens was a far better alternative to ice baths. And after taking it, I felt a lot better. In fact, the whole thing probably kept me sane and healthy at the same time. And also being the kind of nutritional drink I needed to survive those hours, and also the 2 a.m. biltong binges I did a few times. Look, I am not going to pretend I have a balanced diet, so Athletic Greens is how I cover the nutritional basis. 1 small scoop of AG1 with water, and I drink it first thing in the morning each day. Done. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D, and also 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Inca. That's the Inca from the end of my Red Inca podcast. So athleticgreens.com/Inca. Check it out now because it is the best green top you'll ever invest in.
Well, welcome back to Uncovered, Jarrod Kimber and Bharat Sundaresan. Look, let's finish this off very quick. We just got a couple of questions that I thought were interesting in the chats. All Things Cinema Vodcast says, I suppose it's better if I put it on the screen, isn't it? What do you make of Rahane's inclusion for the World Test Championship final? Fab IPL and a decent Ranji season. I think he had a fantastic Ranji, didn't he? It makes sense to back experience in England. Look, yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with the ball moving laterally. Whatever had happened to our Rahane over the last couple of years seems to have been shaken off from him. Great catch in the IPL again today. And so I think it makes sense, if they still think he's one of the best players I've seen in the team, to at least take him over. That I don't think that necessarily means he's going to play, but I can see why you might take him over and see how things are going.
I think it's also an indication from the Indian selectors that they're not. There is a question mark about that Indian middle order, right? Like post Kohli, the number 5 position. Yes, Shreyas Iyer is injured, unfortunately, and he would have been part of the squad if he wasn't injured. But it's still, he's not really cemented it, like made it his own. Like Abel, I'm sure, knowing how skillful he is and how talented he is and how determined he is to play Test cricket, I'm sure he'll make it his own at some point or in the future. But at the moment, they still feel like number 5 is still up in the air.
But even if he does make it his own, this is the thing. If we don't know if he'll ever be as good at playing, it doesn't matter because he's not in this. He's not fit anyway. But we don't know if he'll be that good against a lateral moving ball in England anyway.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that he could be one of the best players in the world in many other conditions. But we just don't know how that will go. At least with Rahane, they're like, wow. He struggled over the last couple of years. He looks like he's got his mojo back, and he can do that thing. It's a bit like Australia taking, Renshaw or in the old days when they take Darren Lehmann to Asia, right?
Yeah.
By that point, they kind of decided Darren Lehmann wasn't their main player, but when they go to Asia, they might take him again.
Yeah, and I think the opposition maybe also has come into, or maybe also played a big role in it. His record against Australia, and I think the feeling around the world is the Oval. I don't think it's as bouncy as it used to be. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's a pitch where, especially in June, there'll be more bounce, which is where Rahane comes into his own. And I think his just what he's done against Australia as a captain, as a batter over the years, away from home more so than at home, I think would have played a role in it as well. And India are desperate to win this World Test Championship final. If you are Rahul Dravid, you don't have a world title. I mean, India haven't won a world title in a long time. I'm sure we've all spoken about it a lot.
Are you
But
sure? No one's mentioned that to me on Twitter.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, in the last couple of minutes because you haven't checked Twitter.
Yeah, I probably had 4 tweets about it.
So I think, and if not pressure, but there is this expectation that you're Rahul Dravid, you need to win something major away from home. I think that hasn't happened. They didn't win in South Africa. Yes, they've beaten Australia at home now in a series which could have gone either way, right? So I think that also maybe had a role to play in it. But I think it's more to do with them identifying the fact that, look, number 5, we don't know. Shreyas would have been there. We would have taken him. Surya Kumar Yadav just played that one test against Australia. I don't see them having risked playing him in this big final that they really are desperate to win, having made it once before, and what happened there 2 years ago. So I think that played a big role in it as well. Like the opponent, the fact that Australia or India think the selectors think, well, that number 5 not we're not convinced it's been taken, so it might still be a stopgap selection, and also the runs in the Ranji Trophy would have helped as well.
Kyle says, since there's one game a night, are IPL TV ratings heavily affected by the standing of the teams playing, or is it more market size and player popularity? It's all three. I don't think there's one or the other, and it probably depends on different times. Obviously, at the moment, even if Chennai weren't winning any games, I think Dhoni's ratings would be absolutely through the roof. The smaller markets certainly have a part to play, but I remember the ratings going down. I think I was talking to I can't remember if it was an IPL executive or a TV executive, that they were like, yeah, we had a bad year this year because Chennai and Mumbai both struggled. So those things are very, very real. So I don't think it really is a combination of all three. It's not just one or two things.
Yeah, and it's not just TV ratings this year. Don't forget, it's TV ratings and digital ratings. So they're being shared. It's not the same as it used to be in all the previous years anyway.
Well, there's more people watching it because of Geo putting it free to air, right? So, well, free to stream, free to app. I don't know, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, but I mean, you read interviews from Sanjog Gupta. There's a really good one in the Economic Times from a couple of weeks ago. Sanjog Gupta, of course, who heads Star Sports, and he speaks about there being a 25% spike in TV ratings, and how, except the COVID years where obviously more people were watching on TV because they couldn't go to the ground, this is the best numbers they've done ever in the IPL, if you leave 2020, 2021 aside, and despite the infiltration of Geo and the digital streaming, which they don't have anymore. It used to be on Hotstar in the past, as you know. So I think that has also played a role in it. But you're right. I mean, when it comes to the ratings itself, it has nothing to do with it can't just be one factor. And also, I think weekend games, you just get more, unlike in the one difference I would say between Indian audiences and audiences in Australia or England is, on a Friday night, more people go out in Australia, depending, especially if it's summer. I mean, this is when cricket is played.
Yeah.
Sun's out, it's nice weather, so you're out more than you are in India, where there aren't so many options to go out and have a good evening unless you are ready to spend money. Here, you can just go for a walk or go to the beach or do whatever. Like I'm sure it is in England as well. So I think that plays a big role as well. So you'll find numbers spiking towards the weekend because that's when families are together and sitting in front of the television. But maybe I'm generalizing. I haven't lived in India for 5 years, so maybe things have changed.
You are. Girish has, do you think the bowling and economy of 7.5 on a flat deck like Chinnaswamy is more valuable than averaging score of 40 at a strike rate of 120 on a very tough pitch? The best way of putting this is every single T20 innings is contextual. And we have some information that we can contextualize, and we can get the the interest. So, for instance, if you score 40 in the middle overs on a tough pitch, that might actually be above the scoring rate of the rest of the game, right? Or if you make 40 but you batted the last 10 overs, chances are you're going to be below the scoring rate of the game. So that's the big thing with T20 cricket. I just think every single thing is contextual, which, to be fair, your question has brought about. But that's the only way to really look at those things. You can't look at them in isolation in any other way. And over a long period of time, you can definitely see the bowlers who You can definitely see the bowlers or the batters, if they're successful, based on that contextual information, which means far more than just the sort of the raw numbers that we're used to. I'm just putting it out there that the best bowler in the league may not be a guy who bowled 1 over for Chennai today, despite the fact he has the most wickets.
Oh, I was just going to bring up Tushar Deshpande. So how do you read into him being the purple cap holder? But is he still the? I think Mohammad Shami has overtaken
I think
him.
he's
But regardless,
equal purple
he's
cap
equal.
holder. Yeah, I think they both
Yeah.
have 17. I think that's right.
That's right.
Well, I looked it up today. He has there's no bowler who's ever taken 15 wickets in an IPL season at anything above 9.7 runs and over. And coming in today, he was going at 11s.
Yeah.
And I think the top 3 worst seasons ever were all not part-timers, but all-rounders. Andre Russell and Shardul Thakur, those sorts of bowlers. It's phenomenal. He does attack at times when I think someone should be telling him not to, but they're pushing him in that particular way. But as I said earlier, I do think Deepak Chahar was perhaps rushed back in to give them a little bit more stability, a little bit more consistency there. It's very rare to combine a economy rate that high with an average that low. And usually what happens is you might get someone like Shardul's a perfect example, who did it one year, who took a lot of wickets, but at around 8, 9 and over. And Andre Russell's done this a lot in his career. There's a few guys like that. It doesn't usually transpose that you get a 10 or 11 or a 12 runs per over, because eventually the wickets do actually chip. Even if you're bowling hit me balls, eventually the wickets do trim down on the economy. So I think the best answer about him is that I would definitely be making a video of him. I'm just getting more data before I do it.
Good point.
Karen says, don't you think it's time for the Champions Trophy to come back now that there are so many leagues around? So the reason that it will never come back is because it didn't work financially, and because people around the world didn't tune into their games. A lot of it is to do with time zone. Champions League in Europe makes sense because everyone's on roughly the same time zones. That's not the case in cricket. Also, Dirk Nannes qualified for about 9 teams, I think, in 1 year. Karen Pollard about 7 teams. Eventually, I think it'll be much less like football, and it'll be much more like basketball. And basketball used to have a version of this. I think it was called the McDonald's Cup or the McDonald's Trophy. I think the Chicago Bulls played in Europe 1 year. No one took it seriously, and that's what would happen with the Champions Trophy. I personally would have loved it if it would have kept going and it would have ended up being bigger than the IPL. I think it would have been a fantastic thing, but it's not the geography of cricket, the business model of cricket, everything just doesn't make any sense.
And if you read about the history of the Champions League, it was also, one of the many reasons it came into being was they also wanted Star Sports to be on their side. And if you remember, Sony get the rights for the IPL.
Yeah.
And, Star Sports had the rights for the Champions League till it lasted. And there was a lot of fanfare around the Champions League. The first one obviously got postponed because of the terror attacks in Mumbai in 2008. And it's all momentum as well, right? So the IPL starts in April that year. And the first ever Champions League was supposed to happen in December that year. I mean, who knows if it happens the same year?
Maybe
the trajectory is different. But because of the terror attack and the postponement, it starts for the first time in 2009, by which time the IPL's already had 2 seasons, one in India, one in South Africa. It's already picked up steam. And the Champions League, maybe, who knows? It's all about timing. Everything in life is.
But, you're watching the Otago Vaults, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it just... I think Middlesex might have played 1 year or whatever.
Yeah, they did.
It just wasn't the same, right?
Yeah.
So an IPL team, they shouldn't be playing against Middlesex or Otago Vaults. It's not even, and so things have slightly changed in that. And now that you have the South African League, and it's a fair question that he asked from that perspective. But will Indian audiences watch it? Is the only thing that would bring it back. It costs a lot of money to run too.
It does.
And so from that perspective, I just don't think we'll ever see it again. I don't think it will make the money. I still think it would have been fantastic. Also, was it Mumbai who had 5 overseas players 1 year because they just changed the rules to allow them to have an extra overseas player, which was I always appreciated the ability to just change the rules midway through the tournament to help one of the bigger teams. Anyway, mate, I think that's us for this week. I would like to thank the great man for coming on. You can find him. Your Twitter account is BeastieBoy07?
Yeah, that's right.
I should know that. I have to write it down about 83 times a day. You can find me at a Jarrod Kimber, I think. But thank you for supporting the podcast. If you put a comment up or if you're involved in Patreon, I tell you this, Bharat is very, very impressed with the question level so far. In fact,
Yeah,
I'm not
I
sure
am.
I'll get him back to Uncovered because he's sick and tired of my questions. He'd much prefer nerdy questions about umpiring, which, to be fair, I thought I was the king of, but apparently I've been supplanted by people like Neron. But big thanks to everyone for coming on, and we will see you again next time. Oh, I said that, and then I realized that I didn't have the ad ready to play. Now I have the ad ready to play.
If you like what we are making here and you want to know if you can help out, well, you can. On top of asking super chats on our lives, you can also support us through Patreon or buy me a coffee. The more support we can get, the better and more videos we can make. On Patreon, there are plenty of other things we offer too, like a Discord server, the chance to ask questions directly, AMAs, and early versions of our recordings. This channel only exists because people like you help support it. We have to buy equipment, software, pay wages, and my mortgage, I suppose, just to make this stuff happen. And if you don't have any money available to spend, it isn't just your money we want. Shares, likes, retweets, comments, subscriptions, the little bell icon thing, all of it. They help us build and become more professional, make more videos, better videos, all that sort of stuff. So thank you for watching everything